I'll start with the inspirations for the Treant Empire and the Supprian Alliance. The original lore for the Supprian Alliance was minuscule. It was a coalition of states which broke away from the Treant Empire and were now aligned with the Merchant Empire. They really had no fluff at all, and eventually they were fluffed as Hawaiian. I don't really know why. As far as I remember, it was just in the thread it was brought up. Oh, that's one of the last places without any lore. And that's how their lore came to be. The Treant Empire, on the other hand, was fluffed out from the very start. When they formed, they instantly became the setting's nature faction. Every setting has it, be it Lord of the Rings, World of Warcraft, Warhammer 40k, D&D. There's always the druid nature guys. The original Treant Empire was most based off Lothar Treants, with Druids being their servants, and Wood Elves being occasionally mentioned, with the vassal tribes at the time having had no fluff at all, beyond that they included humans. The first major developments in Treant lore came later in lore of other nations like Morlocks, which was capturing Dryad slaves, and that it was actually all a plan to just infiltrate the nations, which means that the Treants were anything but good, selling their own into slavery for infiltration and evil magic rituals, or quote-unquote evil. It also introduced the fact that Dryads don't have true free will and can be at any time subjugated by a Treant. The second minor addition was the allegiance of the Kissel Ord to the Treant Empire, and their slow integration into just another vassal tribe. While not showing an evil side of the Treant Empire, it showed that they were still very active. This firmly established the Treant Empire as powerful and active, and not some hippie tree huggers, which maybe they were originally intended to be. This got expanded upon further when the Fire Rose was introduced, where the Treant Empire attempted to take over the whole world but was thwarted by a coalition from the Celestial Subcontinent, the Great Ord, and various Ram's Head and Midland nations. Then also were the 14 Wars of Wood and Steel, which is a basically endless string of wars between the Merchant Empire and the Treant Empire. The last major change to the Treant lore was the fluffing out of the vassal tribes, which were decided to be mostly like Brazilian natives mixed with African pygmies, as well as some inspirations from nearby nations like Midland or the Merchant Empire itself. This somewhat established that one, they are very backwards, they view the Treants as gods, and that the Treant plan is actually much more evil than intended. It's not just creating a giant jungle, it's enforcing theocratic anarcho-primitivism of a religion they stand atop of. And this is, in my opinion, the unique appeal of the Treant Empire, as they feel the nature faction niche while being one of the most evil nations in the entire setting. I don't think, except maybe the Necro Swampers, there's another as obviously evil faction as the Treant Empire, which does to some extent make sense considering that the main religion of the setting is a cult of progress which actively promotes the taming and subjugation of nature and the climate. The predominant characteristic of the Treant Empire is their unique Treant climate. Unique biome characterized by ridiculously large trees which block out the sun, making it so that the only source of light close to the ground are glowing mushrooms and glowing bugs. The climate overall is hot and moist. The tree roots grow so densely that one never really encounters open soil, and it's characterized by giant insects and giant birds, as well as a lot of verticality due to the trees. The other climate found in the region, mainly in the southern Treant Empire and the Supprian Alliance, is the tropical rainforest. It was never terraformed, either because it's recently taken, or because it's simply already so close to the ideal Treant biome that they just simply didn't bother. The rainforest doesn't have very much of a description, but considering that the Merchant Empire, which originally controlled most of the region, is fluffed as Indian, I would expect a Southeast Asian-like jungle with orangutans and tigers and stuff like that, maybe with some Treant wildlife like giant bugs, and maybe even some unique ram's head wildlife such as the clay-faced monkeys. For the Treants being the nature faction, the wildlife of their empire is relatively unexplored. The only official piece of animal with its own wiki page is the big bumble, which is a cat-sized bee which inhabits the forest, though carrion galloping bats also could possibly live there. In right faggotry, specifically in the reports of Hector Ulenki, two other life forms are mentioned, the Ko-o-oa, which is a burrowing grasshopper the size of a rabbit. They are kept as livestock by the natives because their larvae produce a slime which can be used to heal burns. They're specifically kept by the Chanzi tribe. Kept more generally is the Kakula frog, which it's not said whether or not it's domesticated or just hunted, but their poison is applied to arrows and darts for warfare. What are the races predominant in the region? As generally accepted, dwarfs, the Supprian Alliance, and the Treant Empire share the same races. The Treants were originally created in the Age of Genesis by humans as an experiment in giving nature sentience, possibly to communicate with it, or as a terraforming effort akin to the Great Mollusk Reefs. Treants are sentient, tree-like beings that mainly reside in the Treant Empire, although can be found elsewhere. Treants look like trees that grew legs and a face. They are very large creatures, usually ranging from 10 to 20 feet. Though because Treants never stop growing, bigger heights can be achieved, with sizes being reported up to 60 feet tall. However, for a Treant to reach that size, they would have to be a little over 1,000 years old, which is rare, but possible, as Treants pathetically don't really have to die. But after 300-350 years, they start having difficulties maintaining their body and a sound mind, which slowly kills them, as they lose their sanity and become unable to move at all, with the death of a Treant being referred to as falling down, and is regarded a natural and respectable part of life by Treants and their worshippers. Dryads. Dryads are the most recognizable servants of the Treants, and the second most important race of the Treant Empire. They are used as shock troops, sentinels, envoys, administrators of human vassal tribes, and arcanists. Creation. It is believed that they were designed long ago by Treants to be the perfect servant race. No one is entirely sure how the original Dryads were created or even how new ones are made. Although Dryads, who almost always appear female, will sometimes marry humans and elves, the process by which the offspring of these relationships is born is shrouded in mystery. All Dryads are said to be born from the soil and have a so-called kin tree, though it is unknown how literal this is. It has been long rumored that Treants can create new Dryads at will when needed, with the help of powerful magic. In the report of Hector Ulenki, he describes himself witnessing the rebirth of a Dryad. Not birth, that's important here. The Dryad started crying, and I was told to execute her, as she was bound, so I did. Life drained from her, or so I thought. Once again all the natives fell to the ground, but I did not, as from said Dryad another was born. One of different features. She was to be a replacement for the relic which the previous one destroyed. To these natives in front of me I was just granted a divine being as a servant. This basically describes how when one Dryad is killed, easily if a Treant is present another one can be made out of the corpse using magic, which in the very least implies that Dryads are magic constructs. Appearance-wise, Dryads are natural shapeshifters and can transform from an almost human form to one which is very tree-like, nearly like a small Treant. Usually they present as a blend of two forms, likely because that's more comfortable than either of the extremes. Some believe that when a Treant is exerting control over a Dryad, she temporarily presents some of her more tree-like features, while others see this as a sign of them trying to suppress strong emotions. Dryads have an intimidating range of natural abilities, thanks to being a creation for slave races. It's their purpose, so they were created with useful abilities by the Treants. The previously mentioned ability to shapeshift, so change their color, change their appearance from human to tree-like, etc. Pheromones. Dryads can release a wide range of pheromones in order to manipulate the behavior of humans, elves, and animals. Plant growth, which is just plant magic, which can generally be learned by humans, as well as durability. The Dryads don't really have internal organs, and thus, if damaged, can quickly regenerate it, and they don't have generally vitals, which you can hit. Here I'd like to mention the way the pheromones could be used for torture. This one is an excerpt from the travel journal of Jelainen Hull. Iris had her fun for the next couple of days. She was a master of psychological torture and figured out all my main weaknesses within hours. She used her mind magic, which I later found out was called pheromone, to amplify my fear of physical pain to hysterical levels, to create false feelings of lust in order to induce shame and self-loathing, and to draw me deep into sorrow and depression, where I would tell her my deepest doubts and fears. Despite everything that she did to me, she was still able to use said pheromones to inspire intense feelings of loyalty and friendship to her, which she would then brutally crush, ranting at length how pathetic I was. So yeah, said pheromones can be really strong, making people act in spite of even their own judgment. Overall, there's multiple varieties of dryad. The most common are the vassal dryads, which live in the Treant Empire and are servants of the Treants. When in human lands for long enough, a handful of dryads have broken the indoctrination, but must be kept far away from Treants so that their ability to control dryads is not used. Funnily enough, even those with tiny traces of dryad ancestry are somewhat known to fall under Treant influence, even if they have strong allegiances to other causes. Maybe that is why the Treants are so keen on exporting dryads to crossbreed with other races outside. As the most senior vassals of the Treant Empire, dryads work closely with wood elves as well as with vassal human tribes. Civilized dryads can be occasionally found in Morlocks and other regions and are often descendants of slaves. As mentioned above, some deserted the Treant cause willingly, but most descend from slaves brought to Morlocks. Many travelers find the docile dryads of Morlocks to be strange, especially in contrast to the savage shock troops and enforcers of the Treant Empire, and suspect that the civilized Treants of the Morlocks are still exerting some level of influence on them, possibly making them as docile as they are. The Wood Elves are the third hierarchically most important race of the Treant Empire. Wood Elves are servants of the Treant Empire, generally higher on the pecking order than the human vassal tribes, but lower than Dryads and Treants. Most are well versed in nature magic, and a few are Dryads in disguise. Much like human vassal tribes, they are a diverse peoples who are split into many different tribal groups, which play different roles within the Treant Empire. Appearance-wise, they are diverse. Relatively pure elves have pale skin like the first elves, and hair that varies from light reds to blondes. Those with some human blood tend to have darker skin, while those altered by Treant magic or mixed with dryads tend to have green or bark-like skin, and other dryad-like features. At times where Wood Elf ends and the Dryad starts can be blurry, because of a lot of crossbreeding between the two. The Treant Empire natives. They are humans, but are predominantly characterized by being as short or even shorter than dwarves, with proportions of normal humans. That makes them appear somewhat childlike to outsiders. They have skin ranging from black to red, and are possibly altered by the Treants to be more susceptible to dryad pheromones, and are more talented in magic. It's important to note that not all Treant vassal tribes are Treant Empire natives, with the Amazons, for example, being more closely related to the Mag Amazons, etc. Dwarves. The Dwarven people are a long-lived and ancient race, with the oldest ones being able to grow as old as 500. They are inherently linked to innovation and the creation of grand buildings. That's probably why they were exterminated by the Treants completely within their lands. The only dwarves within the region live within the Supprian Alliance. It's really the only place where dwarves live far away from any mountains. With the races out of the way, Let's get to the Empire itself. The Empire's territory and the world's greatest jungle are one and the same. The Treants make sure it is so. And as wild as it seems, it's wholly designed for sentient plant life. The heat and humidity is oppressive. The insects are as big as birds, and the birds are big enough to carry off a child. The soil is a labyrinth of fallen branches, webs of vines, and so thick that they can make a whole tree disappear. Below the layers of rotten leaves there isn't much soil, for it seems that whenever there is space between two roots, it is taken by a third one. The green canopy hides the sun and moon, but the veins of luminescent brown fungus and orange lichens within the trunk growths ensure that it's never truly dark. Your nose will be assaulted by honey garlic, rotten wood, pollen and thousands of fragments, all fresh, damp, sweet and nauseous at the same time. Your ears might never calm down to all the shrieks, mating calls, rustling leaf creaks that happen all day and night, though in the undergrowth there's little distinction between day and night. For those that do not submit to the Treant's authority, it is a green hell. All eyes are marked by pheromones that one emits due to eating certain fruits throughout his or her life. For the enemies, there are 1,000 poisons, parasites and diseases in the way, while for allies, this is a great fortress, which protects them in a way. The Treant Empire in its current form exists since its antiquity, when an explorer from the celestial subcontinent made contact with the wild tribes worshipping the Treants and eventually the Treants themselves. It is then that the Treant Empire chose to become a nation in the modern sense, finding the celestial bureaucratic system and structure useful. It is also why, oddly enough, tribal chieftains carry titles which mimic celestial imperial ones. One might wonder how a nation like the Treant Empire even is a threat. They are highly decentralized, primitive technologically, and have a low population density. The answer lies in the Treants themselves and their magic. Treants are massive tree-like beings and mages at the same time. Each Treant doubles as a siege engine, a tank and an archmage. The humans from the vassal tribes, on the other hand, are guerrilla fighters, perfect for fighting in jungles, and that paired with the ability of growing a jungle within hours means that really they can always play up their advantage. The Treant vassal nations are made up of 75% humans, 20% humans with dryad admixture, and 5% Treants, dryads and elves which oversee them. There is obviously no capital, though each tribal confederation likely has a single tribe leading them at each point, as they form either tribes form confederations or are directly under Treant rule at all times. The vassals are mostly tribal humans, as wood elves are allowed to live among dryads. Those with noticeable ant or dryad descendants are commonly elected as chieftains, shamans. The hundreds of tribes have their own customs, languages, and religions, although Treant worship is present in basically all of them. The trade language, which they use among themselves, is called Nhagatupira. It's a sign language which uses movements of the whole body. For those who don't know it, a fast speaker must seem like a very bad dancer. Besides commerce, Nhagatupira is used to perform ceremonies, tell stories, and make speeches. The Treant vassal tribes act as a buffer among the Treants and their neighbors. During peaceful times they trade lumber, healing crystals made out of Treant amber, silver, messenger parrots, capybara jerk, and ceramics for metal tools and weapons, educated slaves and wine of surrounding nations. Westerosi explorer's view on the social structure of the Treant Empire from the travel journal of Jelaine and Hall. Despite being highly organized and fairly disciplined, to the point where they reminded me of Balaran and Celestial soldiers, the vassal tribes dressed in feral costumes which reminded me a bit of wilder Yoroi tribes back home. Despite the name tribe, some of them operated more like specialized organizations, including the tree-shaping Vegegos, the fire-loving Chamza, the brutal Daigas enforcers, However, most tribes filled the roles of common laborers and farmers, including the Restrasi Coritus tribe, who appeared to be of low status due to their relatively recent induction into the empire. Although much fewer in number, the Woodolphs, Dryads, and Treants were unquestionably in charge. They acted a lot like nobles from more civilized lands, and seemed to outrank even the senior human vassals. The Treants are of course both of highest ranking and most visually impressive. On another note, from Hector Ulenki, a description of how it feels to travel with the natives through the Treant Empire. Wandering with the natives towards the battlefield was a chore. While they opened up the forest for our armies with magic, they did not bother to do the same for themselves. Akin to monkeys, they jumped between roots or swung on branches. A few of them used stone tools to help carve out a path for the horses. This shows that while the natives can, technically speaking, use magic to make themselves a path through the forest, they have learned to live with it in such harmony that they don't need to. Now I'm gonna discuss the biggest tribal groups, tribal coalitions, or how would you call them, of the Treant Empire, which are part of the various vassal tribes. The Chamanza. Among the various tribes that form the vassal nation, it is common to practice Treant worship, often treating the massive tree folk as living manifestations of some natural divinity. Over time, and due to the unification of the tribes, a semi-organized form of worship has emerged, with a focal point being the ever-constant cycle of life, death, and rebirth that nature endures. Here come the Chamanza into play. They are known as Ashwalkers, or that's at least what their name translates. Physically, they're similar to the average vassal tribesmen, though short even compared to the rest. They have dark skin and are very quick. They have odd eyes which seem to be containing a wild, blazing intensity that threatens to consume all on their side. This is because their magic often does. The Chamanza focus intensely on the rebirth aspect of the cycle of life, and accordingly have turned to a near fetishistic worship of the concepts of fire and ash. Their magicians wield the most taboo magic in the Treant Empire. Fire magic, burning the landscape and their enemies to charred crisp, the warriors covering themselves in the ashes of the fallen. To them, they are the spark that sets the flame to the dead undergrowth of the forest, so as to make room for new life to grow and spread. To most others, they're a band of pyromaniacs. Why then are they allowed to stay in the Empire, albeit on a short leash? For a few main reasons. While taken to an extreme degree, they're not entirely wrong in their sentiment. At times a cleansing is needed, lest rot and decay choke the life from once a pure growth. 2. They serve as excellent, if sparingly used, auxiliaries for the Treant army. Few would expect the tree folk to bring fire mages to the fields of battle, and it makes the Chamanza all the more effective as a result when used. They serve as brutal enforcers for any politicking that takes place. The destruction that they can bring with themselves to a land which is all forest really keeps any Treant or tribe folk which thinks of rebelling in line. Lastly, they make effective firefighters. As it turns out, having someone skilled in manipulating fire is helpful in containing forest fires which should not be there, let's say. This is the self-described life of a member of the Chamza tribe from a short rite faggotry called Treant or Diplomacy, unfinished rather than short. He killed wild beasts with only spear, but so did all the males in his village, and between hunting, praying to nature spirits, and shining his magical talent, he was doing nothing of note. As we know, so from the description you see their life is relatively simple. They hunt beasts, their magic. The Guaxus are one of the richest and largest tribes. They have tens of thousands of members, and their wealth comes from gathering gold dust from a river which passes through the territory, exchanging it for metal tools and scythe-like blades from foreigners. This makes them superior warriors and better farmers, helping them further grow their numbers. They live together in great halls. For a person or family which lives separated from the others is seen as suspicious in the very least. These halls are surrounded by unique defenses, groves of trees, in whose hollows live a type of poisonous wasp. To cross such woods without knowing the right path is madness. The rite of passage is the same for either gender of the tribe. They believe that the soul resides within the head, and opening a hole in the skull creates a way for it to escape when death occurs. Their fighters, thus they practice trepanation. Their fighters are thus emboldened with the belief that their souls won't be taken by the enemy, and thus gather in war bands with members who swear to guard each other. Then these same bands go forth and acquire which the Waxos prize more than anything, even their gold, heads, which they then shrink and use as amulets, which increase their strength and give them power to resist great wounds. Though whether that is a superstition or actually works has never really expanded. The Iakares. The Iakares tribes formed by dozens of nomad clans which travel all over the empire's rivers and coasts on their ship-like vessels. The common boat is the bumber, a big canoe which can house one family, a fire at the center, a sail, and can be covered by a leather canvas. Bumber flotillas group together for safety, fishing, trading, whale hunting, and gathering pearls. Each clan has a totem, usually an aquatic animal like a frog, shark, crocodile, etc. Among the Icares, being a pirate is an honorable profession. The Treants forbid them from attacking other vassal tribes, but allow them to prey upon foreign vessels which come too close to the empire. A crew is usually made of several families which build a bigger ship. They elect their captain and follow him during combat, but in every other manner, like deciding who to attack, follow the will of the majority. Each clan buries their dead on a specific sambakui. These are earthen mounds filled with layers upon layers of bones. Some sambakui can be mistaken for hells. Many precious offerings to their ancestors are also buried in them, some taken as booty from far lands. Every 10 years the Icaris gather around the sambakui and perform competitions to select guardians. Opinion of a foreigner about the Iakares from the report of Hector Uwulenki. Going down the river we encountered the Iakares, also known as the pests of the Southern Sea, though once again I was smart enough to not mention that name. Being mostly pirates, they are the best known of the humans of the Translands, as they are often seen outside of Treant's lands and are the greatest pirate menace of the Southern Seas, second only to the Fat Man's crew. The Ibaros. The Ibaros are a people marked by a curse. Although they don't know who cursed them, or why, or even when, because of that they're very suspicious towards outsiders and even aggressive. They suffer intense pain when under sunlight, but as they live deep within jungles, shielded from harmful rays, it's not actually that bad, and if they have to leave, they cover themselves in mud, leaves, and feathers, and wear giant hats to protect themselves from the sun. On an out-of-character note, this curse likely is because they're Dampiers, which are mortal descendants of vampire and human, which is very possible considering their proximity to the nation of Conjatina, which is ruled by vampires. Despite the curse, Ibaros are characterized by a love of freedom and even arrogance to some degree. They organize themselves into expeditions and plunder other lands, especially the merchant empire, which many of them believe to be the ones who have cursed them. They don't even do so out of greed, more so out of pettiness, as whatever valuables they loot, they just hide them deep in the jungles. An Ibaro can be recognized by the zigzag tattoos all over their body. It's a sign that she or he passed the rite of adulthood, which consists of spending an entire day under the sunlight. Each village consists of 10 to 20 families, and polygamy is common. When they go hunting or to war, they elect a commander, which must lead by example, and if a hunt or fight ends badly, they are often exiled. They are semi-nomadic, changing places every 3 years. The region they live in is full of rivers, making them skilled at building primitive wooden bridges. The Ibaros divide themselves into 3 groups, all with a different speciality. The Arushus have shamans which can make potions through so-called internal alchemy, where they swallow and chew certain ingredients and then have their own body act as a laboratory, with their sweat then producing the desired substance. That way they can create healing potions, love perfumes, poisons, and many other alchemical concoctions Westerosi alchemists need specialized equipment for or can't create at all. The Agushus. They practice the art of the body domain, which is something akin to the Kifu martial arts, I guess. They fast, meditate, and drink out of a special vine which lets them enter the spiritual realm, also known as getting high. As a result, they can sleep less, survive with little food, and have a very high resistance to pain. Some Agushus can even live under the sunlight. This has led the other Ibaros to believe the Agushus don't suffer the curse and even stigmatize them, as some believe them to be the one who have cursed the rest. The Avushus. The shamans of their group can produce a substance called Tsentak, a substance used in darts, arrow tips, and javelins. It is a magical poison which poisons their enemies but heals the wounds of their allies. As such, it is very important to the Avshus to quickly classify any person they meet as either an enemy or an ally, and to do so reliably. As such, establishing the intentions of newcomers is paramount. The Icambias are one of the Amazon tribes which did not migrate away from Treant land after they were conquered by them. They are led by a dryad queen known as Konhori and have a dozen fortified settlements spread out through the borders of the Necroswampers, acting as frontier guards, making them one of the militarily strongest tribes. Each settlement is actually a stone keep directly linked to many smaller houses. They communicate between each other through manhuares, which are drums made out of 2 hollowed tree trunks, which then can be heard 10 miles away. The temples, being called karanais, are silver-plated pyramids dedicated to either the moons or Treants in their worship. In contrast to smaller Amazon tribes or the Mag Amazons, the Icambias allow men to live among them and even wage war, but they must also accept their lower social status. Men commonly herd capybaras and fight as skirmishers, while the women are full-time warriors, priests, and officers. Men who wish to mate with an Amazon must beat them at the so-called Jungle Marathon, a 3-day race through the jungle which includes puzzle solving, traps, and hunting. The Icambians have a wide range of skin colors and appearances due to accepting women from all of the continent into their ranks if they wish to join. Both men and women wear little more than clay thongs to better deal with the heat and the insects. They use intricate body paints, which also denote their social status, fighting club membership, and other details like their personality. Deciphering one's paint is the basis of Icambian etiquette. All adult women must dedicate themselves to training and warfare. Their rite of passage has them hunting undead within Necroswamper territory, and they either return with a head of an undead or not at all. Those that succeed sharpen their teeth, which is a sign of a true warrior. Their common weapons are bows, 2-handed clubs, bolas, and a type of single stone bolas which can be thrown and used in melee. The Vegigos. They are the tribe with the highest status among all human vassal tribes, it being even comparable to that of Wood Elves. The tribe has an exclusive duty. They are the shapers entrusted by the Treants to make living tools and other items out of wood, sap, and other projects of the jungle. This power is only possible due to their deep ties with the Treants themselves. All families of each tribe can in some way trace their ancestry directly to one or another Treant. They are seen as witches or warlocks by the other vassal tribes, something that both makes them very respected and feared. They create bioluminescent candles, razor grass blades, ember ceramics, petal plates, green towers, bark pickaxes, and spades. The Vegegos were the ones to craft the underground routeways which the Treant vessels may use to travel through the Empire quickly if they need to, as well as the pod ships which form the official Imperial Treant fleet. Their most prized and unique power is to cover themselves with vines, roots, and wood in a sort of living armor. Some Vegegos spend so much time in this state that they fuse together their armor, becoming half man, half plant, sometimes to a point of being hard to distinguish from a Treant. Unknown to the Vegegos themselves is that the Treants see them as a successful experiment of their objective to slowly make all races closer to plants in both mind and body. This is how they plan to one day remake the entire world. The Zangos. Zangos aren't part of any particular tribe. Their origin is unknown, only known to the Treants. What all know is that they are a secret society of people possessed by night spirits, which can smell thieves, witches, and murderers. They wander from tribe to tribe, acting as a supernatural police force. The rumor of a coming Zango is often enough to make people confess, thus they provide the law and order the Treant Empire needs. All Zangos wear a mask, which is said to house the spirit, and the leather cape, which hides their whole body. Once the Zango reaches a village or wandering tribe, they will fall into a trance. This might take hours or days, and the natives will protect him, or the Treants will punish them. After the Zango starts moving again, he will dance towards the evildoers, singing in an unknown language. Then it falls for the tribe to arrest the evildoer, force a confession, judge them, and apply a sentence. Lastly, there are some more minor groups. The Supprian peoples. The Supprians are less organized and less trusted than any of the major tribes due to their relation with the Supprian alliance, who broke away and is a thorn in the Empire's side. The Kazai peoples. Akin to the Supprians, they are loyalist members of the Kazai tribes which split away from the Empire some time ago. They're also distrusted but are loyal and are kept around because they're good mages. They look pretty average for a Treant Empire native, short with dark skin. Wood Elves. Elves are considered to be higher on the racial caste ladder than humans, somewhere between human and dryad, due to their high admixture of Dryadic blood. Wood Elves with light skin have a high standing in Elven society due to their high percentage of First Elves blood, while green-skinned Elves have a high standing in Treant society due to their high admixture of Dryad blood. Lastly, brown or red-skinned Elves, which are the most common type of Wood Elf, have the lowest standing among Elves and to the Treants due to their large admixture of human blood. Wood Elves generally keep more with the Dryads and Treants than humans and are ruled more directly by them. They also do still keep up contact with the First Elves. How many of them are in comparison to the humans within the Empire is unknown, it's just known that they're more rare. The Daiges, a minor tribe which acts as enforcers. They have only been noted guarding slaves though. And the Quirites, a minor tribe of low status consisting of Westerosi humans who converted to the Treant faith willingly or not. They are mistrusted and lower in caste order than most tribes, doing menial work such as farming and maintaining infrastructure, even sometimes working alongside slaves. The Supprian Alliance. The Supprian Alliance derives its name from the Supprian River to its northwest, which is seen as the natural border of the Treant Empire. Originally, the alliance was formed by a few dozen vassal tribes, which rebelled against the Treant Empire not even 3 centuries ago, in what is now known as the Supprian Uprising. It started with 18 founding tribes, which have declared open rebellion. a usually futile endeavor. But thanks to large support from the merchant empire, the 18 tribes managed to survive and secure their independence. This War of Independence indirectly led, or even directly led, to the 14 wars in food and steel, which would lead to the expansion of Treant vessel holdings and the loss of the continental holdings of the merchant empire. What started as 18 tribes in a dense forest slowly transformed into 11 city-states and eventually into 4 great cities. The 4 great cities of the Supprian Alliance are known as Hawafunekilknelegilaha, Heklonikakakana, Krelekiawokna. What is important to note that in spite of 14 wars of wood and steel, since their inception, the external borders of the Supprian Alliance remain completely unchanged. Let's start now with the specific grand cities, as each of them has their own niche and role to play within the alliance. Hawafunekiluna, also sometimes referred to as the City of Thorns, is the most militaristic of all the city-states, as it is the only one with an open border to the Treant Empire, unaided by a river which acts as a natural defense. This is likely why they have invested in grand fortifications. A great complex of walls dots the border, with star-shaped fortresses dotting the inside. The nation consists of one grand city, comprised of a grand fortress of 3 layers, and 10 smaller one-layer fortresses. Farmers live both inside and outside the fortresses, but each fortress is to be self-sustaining when it comes to the food it produces, which is possible only thanks to Treant druidic magic, which boosts farm output. The farms outside of the star forts exist only for the sake of producing a surplus of food for the sake of export, to boost the local economy. The name of the city comes from the fact that their star forts look like a bush with thorns. Knelegujilaha is known as the City of Pearls. Having both access to the Supprian River and the ocean, as well as being in the relative geographic center of the alliance, has made them the local center of trade. Their defenses are mostly comprised of mercenaries, which the other 3 city-states see as foolish, in spite of them also profiting from learning the tactics and equipment from the foreign forces they employ. Beyond trade, what makes the city-state rich is the farming of Treant clam, an odd form of freshwater clam which can grow up to 2 meters and produce pearls as big as half a meter in diameter. The pearls are bland, stiff and green, thus not very expensive or desired, but are popular as a material to line insides of mansions, as the material is very similar to marble. Heklonikakana is known as the City of Craftsmen. In the 4th War of Wood and Steel, the Heklonikakanan army raided a Treant camp of war prisoners, freeing thousands of captive dwarfs. Thinking them to be humans who have grown short due to malnourishment, they took them in as skin, only to later find out what a dwarf is. Thus, the dwarven clan of Krutz has chosen to settle down in the city to repay an eternal debt of gratitude. The city is now famous for the great weapons it produces, which are created with a mix of dwarven craftsmanship and Treant magic. Lastly, Krelekiawokna, also known as the City of Demagogues, is known as the political center of the Supprian Alliance. Being the first city founded, it is also the one surrounded with most prestige. Thus, is the one negotiating on behalf of the alliance of foreign powers, like the Merchant Empire. A more insidious role this city-state plays is espionage. Many of the wars of Wood and Steel would have turned out very differently, and much worse for the alliance if not for the secret spies placed among various vassal tribes. The work of the Krelekiawoknans has led many more minor tribes loyal to the Treant Empire to betray them and join the Supprian Alliance instead. To keep their fierce reputation going, it is custom for all firstborn boys, aged 7, to be given to monasteries where they are trained from birth to be warrior philosophers. The Krelekiawoknan monasteries carry so much renown in the world for producing some of the best diplomats and generals that rulers of other nations have requested the forming of monasteries in their land. Currently there are 20 such monasteries in the city-state itself, 3 within the Merchant Republic and 1 within Swayus. Records of the War of the Fire Rose. The War of the Fire Rose is the defining moment of the ancient era when the Great Hordes, nations of the Celestial subcontinent, Ram's Head, and Midland all created a coalition to fight back against the rapidly expanding Treant Empire, with the war itself being more so a series of wars which lasted 600 years. The Treant Empire was an ever-growing force in the south. First they enslaved and subjugated the human tribes, and then fed them propaganda and religious dogma through decades of enslavement, until there was almost no strife against Treants and the assimilated tribes. The Treants decided that the other humans are taming nature too fast, and if they don't do something, humanity will grow too strong and shatter the quote-unquote balance of nature. And so the War of the Fire Rose started. The Treant Empire began expanding its boundaries around the year 1200 and reaching its territorial peak in the year 1350, just before the unification of the First Horde. It took another 5 centuries of almost constant war until forces of the First Horde, the nations of the Celestial Subcontinent and Ram's Head coalition, led by Radmir, were able to defeat the Treants in 1850. Their armies shattered, forests were turned to ash, and magic was sealed, and the Treant Empire was incapable of expanding beyond their core lands for centuries to follow. But it wasn't a total defeat, which the coalition dearly wanted. Instead, they're forced to limit themselves to subduing the Treants and forcing them back into their core territories due to the betrayal of the First Horde, which invaded the Celestial Kingdoms when its forces were deep in Treant territory. But the victory couldn't be complete because of the betrayal of the Great Horde, which backstabbed the Celestial Empire, in a way letting the Treant Empire survive, even if they collapsed soon after. The Wars of Wood and Steel. Little is generally known about them. It is known that the Fourth War had the dwarves come to the Supprian Alliance for the first time. It is also known that the initial wars caused large territorial losses of the Merchant Empire in their holdings in the Ram's Chin, though it is also known that the 13th War ended in an Achivian victory, whereas the 14th one ended in a draw between the Merchants and Treants. We only possess a detailed account of the battles of the 14th War, again by Hector Ulenki, so from the same short story. Starting with how the Treants do their war cons. The meeting of generals was an affair very different to how it is done in Sunkan lands. Instead of one high general dictating to the others how to run the war, the Treant generals would form a circle. Behind them the Dryads would form a circle, and behind them the various tribal leaders would form the largest set of few circles, the most inner ones being the most senior leaders. All of them would meditate and chant as an odd hallucinogenic smoke fills the room. Me being one of the observers far out of the war tent, I still felt myself fading into a form of trance, memories of children playing filling my mind, whom I recognized as the elder of the Chanzo tribe I traveled with woke me up eventually. He had me bite down on some sort of soft wood which was sour and instantly awoke me, turning me to my senses. Now awake, I observed the smoke dancing. In the smoke, I could see the tactics we were supposed to use in the war to come. The first battle would come only days after, as I would be there to witness a merchant's wake-up, as the Treants call it. The Merchant Republic fights similar to the Celestial, by throwing ridiculous amounts of resources at a problem, though unlike the Celestials, they use money, not manpower. Balls of fire from trebuchets and mages lit up the sky, as bright as the morning sun otherwise would, burning jungle and field alike, and volley after volley followed, lighting up the forest and sky aflame. Then suddenly a silence, broken up by the charge of their cavalry. Above them chewed the Janedi sky whales. It must have cost them a castle to purchase or tame these beasts, Still, this was a war, not a one-sided beatdown. The merchant cavalry charge suddenly stopped, as all their horses started falling over dead. As they ran, and out of the ground emerged tribal warriors, which for days must have been hiding under the dirt breathing for tubes. The cavalry charge had collapsed, but one of the whales managed to make it deeper and grabbed one of the Treant elders, carrying him now high into the sky. Still, one has to underestimate one's enemy when they bring a sky whale to a place full of fire. This tactic maybe would work if the Treants didn't hire mercenaries this time, especially ones which were experienced in hunting sky whales. In fighting a sky whale is using fire, as the creatures violently explode if they are pierced by it, leaving no useful parts behind. This was no hunt though. As soon as I asked Rutka to help me, and she sprouted a giant yet thin spike of dried grass out of the ground, piercing itself like a nail into the giant whale, which then, though ripped itself free from it, the rope spake dangling free. Through Windspeak, she told one of the grander Treants of the weakness to flame, and he grabbed a burning tree and threw it high enough to ignite the rope and kill the whale, but not before losing an arm to the flames himself. Likely due to now understanding that we have ways to combat sky whales, the surviving one was not used in the coming battles. This battle, though, had one of the worst possible results: a draw. The Supprian merchant coalition lost its druid cavalry, and Skywhale, we lost many tribal warriors, Treants and Dryads. The merchant empire uses a tactic known as the War of Five Armies. Knowing that they have a numerical advantage compared to the sparsely populated Treant Empire, they engage in constant war. They have 5 large armies prepared with 4 rest and 1 attacks. They cripple their offensive potential, but in the long term they have an advantage against the vassal armies, which have to fight without rest. The only countermeasure to this tactic is combat ruts, which prolong the inevitable. The Treant Empire, on the other hand, has few forces, but of very high quality, making them superior at shock warfare, as such prolonged conflict favors the humans. Though the more land they occupy, the handier is the vassal specialization in guerrilla warfare, and their home-ground advantage grows. As such, the Battle of the Field of Fehen has devolved into a battle of armies crashing hour after hour. Unlike classic battles, deaths were stacking high, as offensive capabilities of both sides outweighed their defenses. The Treant have extraordinarily powerful magic, while the Merchant Empire had access to Westerosi crossbows. Within days, the battle tactics themselves seemed to evolve, as it transformed from clashes in the open field to exercises in mobility akin to dances. Dances in which, in spite of our failing morale, we managed to hold our own, because of the merchants' lack of windspeak. The Treants held an advantage in the communication on the battlefield. That was the battlefield situation, as I was sent into the forest to meet up with the other raiders, which were only now arriving to the battlefield. They were the Treant trump card to finally break the stalemate. As expected of Melich Sephiri, he understood the battle plan instantly, but he also understood that said plan would likely not work with the battlefield situation as it is. As such, he proposed a change to the Kulhan, and he accepted. Rutka was sent to relay the altered plans with the Treants, hopefully accepting us, as we would all be doomed if they did not. For the plan was bold. It was to attack the resting armies, no likely reduced to 2 out of 5, as due to the length of the battle, the Merchant Empire was forced to call upon more and more reserves. The battle plan was for the Treant forces to start a push to occupy the enemy forces and for the raiders to destroy their supply lines. The plan succeeded splendidly and enemy forces were eventually surrounded. Surrounding them took too long though, as they managed to fortify their position and the joined forces made another mistake. They did not offer a path of retreat. A cornered enemy will fight to the death. One should always offer a fictive path of retreat as a temptation to break their resolve. For now we're forced to fight men ready to die. As raiders are not good at siege warfare. Harassment tactics and open field warfare is our forte, so it was disheartening to be overwhelmed by an enemy we thought we had surrendered. The hope in the war ending in a victory soon was gone when the Supprian forces came from the east. They had annihilated the Eastern Treant army. The Treant Empire never managed to invade the Supprian Alliance, but they always managed to hold them at bay. In this 14th war, that changed. The Supprian army, also containing Treants and Dryads, who defected the Empire, was coming this way. Meanwhile, on the naval front, the Treant fleet was destroyed by a suicide attack utilizing the other Gennady whale, which the merchant navy also paid for, dearly losing a big portion of its fleet. With the forces of the Supprian Alliance, an offer of peace came. The first offer of white peace in the history of the wars of wood and steel, both sides having faced crippling amounts of casualties, both in manpower and economy, with the fronts having barely moved. In exchange for the release of prisoners of war and the encircled army, the merchant empire would do the same and would retreat. This is how the war ended, with minimal pay for the mercenaries and mountains of corpses, so large one must fear attracting a necromancer. Miscellaneous lore. Outside of the Treant Empire, nature worship is predominant form of worship among savages of the marches of Drahe. Other than that, some nature worship is unrelated to the Treants existing in Westtraci. Then there is also the Oak Leaves. There are pagan cults found in human cities that abhor industrialization, or even feudalism for that matter, and the destruction of the environment. The cults take in many of the orphaned and homeless in the city. When these members of society started disappearing, it seems like a blessing at first for the wealthy and for law enforcement. These lost souls return at night, though, to sow the literal seeds of destructions, as each cell is led by a druid agent sent by the Treants to sow discord and convert people. The druids often worship the Dryads and Treants as the ideal state of being, to be one with nature. Cultist cells can be found by following runic markings left throughout the city. Only one who has been inducted and trained to read the runic scripts can follow them to the hidden cell, though. The source of the purple ley line. While officially unknown, the Journal of Urzai the Mage states that the Treants hold the source of all growth magic to be the sacred god tree, and no one has been able to match the control of foliage outside of the Great Jungle, which implies that there is a great tree at the spot where the ley line surfaces, with said tree laying at the center of the Treant 5 and being seen as the origin of nature magic, though it could also be that the tree grew as grand as it is because it is on top of this spot, which is the origin of all nature magic. The sixth splendor, the chimney. It's a massive cenote 100 meters wide and almost a kilometer deep, which leads to a vast underground cavern. Lelas was only able to visit it since it was near the edge of the Treant Empire at the time, but is now inaccessible to outsiders. In his notes, Lelas comments on the agility of the Treants for their ability to scale the massive vines and carved handholds to reach the sacred places carved into the walls of the cenote, some over 100 meters below the surface level, but it is said that even the Treants fear exploring the lower levels of the cenote wall, and none will enter the cavern below, though parts of it are clearly visible when the sun is near or at its peak. There exists another wondrous place within the Treant Empire known as the Heartroot, but beyond mentioning the name, Lelas does not expand upon it. There is multiple problems which the Treant Empire currently faces. The east of the empire has a problem with death cultists, as the vassals there are increasingly converting to death cults of the prophet Rasewat the Never-Living of the Necroswampers. In the south, on the other hand, Trank Blight is slowly spreading, creating necrotic Treants. Trank Blight is small and moss-like with pigmentation of red rust. For normal trees, this fungus is slow acting and it feeds off the tree, and it does not kill it until after decades. For Treants, however, once seeded, the fungus is fast acting and can kill a Treant in the matter of days. There is no way to remove the fungus except by amputation, which is often fatal for a Treant affected by it. It spreads by constantly releasing spores that glide around the tree, making it deadly when a Treant is killed by the trunk bite. After a few hours, 3 to 12, the corpse undergoes curious effect, it reanimates and tries to spread the fungus by affecting other trees and Treants. When uncontained, an outbreak of tree blight in a Treant-dense area can potentially be catastrophic. Necrotic Treants do not need to eat or sleep, and seem to lose all mental functions. A necrotic Treant looks like a regular Treant, except they are mostly covered in trunk blight. Their eyes also rot out of their sockets, leaving empty holes where they once were. Their faces permanently sag open, and the body starts to decompose slightly. Dryads can also get infected and become zombie dryads that way. So what we won't see when in the Supprian Alliance or in the Treant Empire? Starting with the Supprian Alliance, one would feel at first glance as if they were in Hawaii. Before the colonization, of course. Many races would live there and be equal, be they human, dwarf, Supprian, Dryad, Treant, or Ramshead human. The Supprians feel to me like the Swiss. Each state within the alliance dislikes and mocks the other, but woo on the outsider which dares to insult their brothers. The Supprians combine the wealth and technology of the merchants with the magic of the Treant. It's a place where magically growing wood is incorporated into modern architecture, and where one can see a Treant wearing thick full plate armor. It actually seems like a generally nice place to live compared to the rest of the setting. The Treant Empire is on the other hand much less nice place to be in. You feel constantly watched as each tree could be a Treant and Treants speak to trees anyway. It's humid and claustrophobic with wild beasts surrounding you on every side. It's the land of the plants, and you are an inferior here. There's a strict racial caste system, and the natives practice old savage customs like drawing enemy heads, smoking drugs, and filing their teeth. The atmosphere within the Treant Empire is oppressive and alien to basically all outsiders. Their social structure is confusing, complicated through and through, and the use of celestial names makes it even more nonsensical. Complex tribal and racial caste systems, as well as rituals, can change on a whim from village to village, and the villages constantly change spots as well. It's simply put a place which is at the same time wild and unexplored, and constantly surveyed and totalitarian. So I guess that sums it up for the Treant Empire and the Supprian Alliance. These two definitely deserve their own video, even if it was 90% Treant Empire stuff. The next video is gonna be about the various about the technology factions, so Goldland, the Techno Barbarians, the World Scar, etc.